why is it that the person in charge of Obamacare, that being Ms. Sebelius, Governor Sebelius at HHS, she was only there 48 times. So am I to believe that Shulman went 157 times to talk Obamacare, but the woman in charge of the program, Sebelius, only went 48 times? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't even pass the smell test. Look, you would think that Kathleen Sebelius would be clearly the person that would be speaking on behalf of the administration or on behalf of the actual organization when it came to Obamacare. But here's the real question. When you go to the White House, there's a very specific reason why you're going to the White House. Look, it's very nice to go there for Easter roll and so forth, but to go there over 100 times means there's a very specific reason why you're going there, especially leading up to the president's reelection campaign in 2012. There's a reason for this. The reason for this is because I'm sure he very much wanted to be in concert with whatever the administration wanted him to do, whether it's Obamacare, whether it's the IRS rulings, or in terms of some very specific rulings. So it just doesn't add up. There's no question about it.
All right, Mark Hannah, I want to give you a whack at this before we move on to Mr. Holder. Why should anybody believe that this guy Shulman, with 157 trips to the White House, didn't talk to political operatives, for example, about the harassment of these conservative groups? Why should anybody believe that?
Well, I think the line between political operative and policy person in the White House is, admittedly vague. But I want to get back to something that Robert said and this contrast between other members of the cabinet.
I think political operatives work in a different. I used to work in the White House. They work in a different section, in a different neighborhood. If you're going to talk policy, you're in the policy shop. If you're going to talk politics, then you go down the road, you go down the floor, and you talk politics. What bothers me is this guy was there so much, and Sebelius wasn't even there half the time he was there.
That's not true.
I think he was talking politics.
That's not true, Larry.
And that's not what the head of the IRS is supposed to do.
If you go back to the Daily Caller article, it says within the article that the visitor logs probably don't include every time somebody who is a cabinet-level position was visiting the White House. For example, Jack Lew was only listed about 40 or 50 times while he was chief of staff. Of course, he worked most of his time in the White House.
Story. Sebelius 48 times in the log. Okay? This guy Shulman 157. Now, come on.
And the only reason that log
that is just so far out. Be honest with me.
Larry, the only reason that log exists, let's not forget, is because of the historic decision by President Obama himself to make a visitor log in a move toward transparency. Now, we're criticizing the administration with this IRS, scandal, as we like to call it, as sort of violating or being non-transparent. The only reason this log exists is because of the spirit of transparency that exists
the spirit of transparency didn't work too well in this particular case. But anyway,
what's interesting...
Let me switch gears. Hang on, I got to switch gears. There appears to be growing roadblocks for Eric Holder's planned media charm offensive, okay? The Attorney General invited Washington bureau chiefs for all major national news organizations for an off-the-record meeting to discuss the guidelines for subpoenas of reporters. Now, already some, including NBC News, New York Times, Associated Press, and others, have declined the invitation. This, as Congress continues to investigate whether Holder lied under oath earlier. Take a listen to this.
With regard to the potential prosecution of the press for the disclosure of material, that is not something that I've ever been involved in, heard of, or would think would be a wise policy.
All right, once again, we're joined by distinguished Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz. All right, Alan, you got to really help me on this one. Did he lie? Did he mislead? We know that he signed the warrant for James Rosen. I mean, what's up with this?
Well, the law permits prosecution of journalists for printing classified material. It has for many, many years. The policy has always been against it. The New York Times, of course, published classified material in the Pentagon Papers case. Just last week, Time magazine boasted that it was publishing classified material that was given to it by somebody in the administration. But there's always been a policy against going after the journalists. Now, with WikiLeaks, of course, they said not real journalists, double standard maybe, but the policy has been against it. And I think what Holder was saying is, look, we haven't changed that policy. We're not prosecuting any journalists. The search warrant that he signed was for a journalist, but for investigation of the leaker himself, who was possibly a target of investigation. So I don't think he lied.
Don't you have to consult or tell the journalist or the journalistic group? Shouldn't Holder or some one of his deputies talk to the people in the AP or talk to Jim Rosen? That I thought went hand in hand with this approach.
Well, usually, but now you have the hypocrisy of the press, who love to have off-the-record meetings. They die for off-the-record meetings with the Attorney General, the President, suddenly saying we're above off-the-record meetings. We only want meetings on the record. So there's a little bit of hypocrisy on all sides here. What we need is new legislation that determines when and if ever you can go after journalists for publishing classified material. You cannot leave it to the discretion of the Attorney General.
So you don't think he lied? You think,
I don't think he lied.
You don't think he lied?
I think he should write a letter apologizing for what he said, because it turns out that he did have some contact with some aspect of the case, but I do not believe he sat there and said, I am now deliberately telling a lie.
All right, Robert Traynham, Bob Traynham, you heard what Ms. Dershowitz said. You buy it?
No, I don't think the Attorney General lied per se, but I do think he was disingenuous. I mean, look, the politics of this are horrible. One would think that the Attorney General or one of his deputies would have sat down with the bureau chief of, I don't know, Fox News or whatever the case may be, and said, listen, this is what we're doing here. Off the record, you need to understand that there are major national ramifications or national security ramifications if, in fact, we do this. So it sounds like his office did not handle this very, very well and was totally tone deaf when it came to handling this in a very professional and political lowercase p way. But I don't think he lied, but I do think he was disingenuous.
Mark Hannah, I'll give you the last word on this. You know, I've been to many of these press gatherings. It can be off the record, quote unquote, but there's also something called deep background, so that as a writer you can say, well, senior Justice Department sources told me this. Is that what they're going to do? Are they going to try to clarify the policy and do it on deep background?
Well, I don't think they'll allow it. I mean, the AP just said unless it's on the record, they're not going to participate. I think that what happens here, though, is that we have a culture of overzealous pursuit of surveillance that exists. It's kind of a holdover from the Bush administration's war on terror and the spying.
No, that's a good point. I don't mean to interrupt, but you're making a great point before we leave this. In a way, Holder is more zealous than the president. I mean, in fact, oddly enough, while Holder is being so overzealous with the surveillance, the president's out there telling us in his speech that the war on terror is over. I mean, Holder's to the right of Obama on this.
This is a sticky issue, and Professor Dershowitz probably can speak to it a lot better than I can, but the balancing act between national security interests and First Amendment freedom of the press is a tricky one, and it requires a judgment call. I don't know whether there are Democrats and people, progressives, who are upset with the decision that
Mark Hannah and I will both give you the last word on this.
Well, it's absolutely right. It's so hard to strike the appropriate balance, and it has to be done legislatively. There have to be exceptions. You can't just publish the names of spies, secret weapons, and expect to get away with it. But, you know, they shouldn't be prosecuted for publishing material that the administration basically winked and said, you can publish this. So we need standards, and they have to be legislatively adopted.
I got to leave it there. Thank you very much. Alan Dershowitz, we appreciate you coming back on the show very, very much.
Thank you.
Robert Traynham, Mark Hannah are going to rejoin